Welcome. This is Meet the Candidates on BCTV. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and I'd like to welcome Keith Stern to the program. He is the GOP gubernatorial candidate, and this is your first run for governor. Is that correct, Keith?
Yes, it is.
And why governor?
Vermont is a broken state. Economically, just the cost of living is outrageous. Just about every day I hear from somebody saying, I just can't stay here any longer. We have to move. And that really hurts because, I'm a lifelong Vermonter. And I love this state, and for somebody that loves it as much as I do, having to leave because of finance, that's a terrible thing.
And you have run for political office before.
Yes.
Remind us what office it was.
Congress. First time it was against Patrick Leahy as an independent, and then against Peter Welch and Martha Rainville as an independent. And the third time was as a Republican against I would have been against Peter Welch if I won the primary. Never serious candidate. I'm a small business owner. I own Stearns Quality Produce in White River Junction.
Right.
And I'm talking about ideas, how to fix the tax situation, how to make it a level playing field for businesses through taxes, and who's going to listen to a small business owner. So I got on the ballot so people would hear my ideas. And
between the time you ran for those previous offices and your run for governor right now, have the issues changed for you, or has it always been around kind of affordability and taxes?
Oh, it's always been about that. Yeah.
And how do you differentiate yourself from our current governor, Phil Scott?
I don't see him as a leader.
How so?
Well, with the budget. He let them go to the very end of the session, and they couldn't reach an agreement, so we ended up in a special session that cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. I will make sure that the budget is #1 priority for the legislature. I'm going to tell them, get that done before we work on anything else. Get it done. If we have to go back and adjust at the end of the session because the numbers have changed, that's fine. At least everything's in place to adjust it easily. Don't work on this bill and that bill and everything else, and then at the end of the session, rush to try to come up with a budget.
Another issue that you have on your website that you talk about is gun rights, and that was a big issue that Scott tackled at the beginning of this legislative session.
Well, it was kind of in the middle.
Middle?
Yeah. Because the first thing was the pod bill.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. How do you see yourself the same or different from Scott on that issue?
Well, the Constitution is very clear, the Vermont and the U.S. Constitution. It says people's rights won't be infringed. And they were infringed. And I won't do that. I believe in the Constitution 100%. If somebody wants to work to get it changed, that's one thing. But you have to follow the Constitution.
One thing that was unique about this time that Vermont kind of tackled gun rights was there had just been a near miss of a school shooting up in Fairhaven. How do you weigh those two issues between gun rights and something like school safety?
Well, it wasn't about guns as much as the mental health of that person. Same with Parkland. They knew what the kid in Parkland was like. They knew he was in all kinds of trouble, having all kinds of issues. And they kind of just brushed it aside, it seemed like. That's what we're going to focus on, taking care of the mentally ill, making sure they get treated properly. And if that happens, then the school shooting shouldn't be a problem. But we got to secure our schools. We do have unfortunately, we do have some crazies. I mean, there's no better way to put it. I mean, there's mentally ill people, and we have to protect the schools better. The bills that they passed didn't address that at all, really.
Thank you for those responses.
Sure.
You know, one thing, I was going through your website earlier today, and one thing you talk about, and you brought it up at the beginning of our conversation, was about affordability and making Vermont an easier place for people to make a living.
Right.
And your slogan, I think, is smaller government, bigger economy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you propose reducing government or making it less expensive? Because I think at one point you say reducing the bloated government.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are some of the things you would
Okay.
do?
The Vermont Health Connect has a $30 million budget. Go on there and sign up for a policy. I'm hearing people are telling me there's anywhere from $6,000 to $12,000 a year deductible, yearly deductible for a policy, which doesn't make a sense for anybody. You know, you're going to be paying, I guess it's around $200 a month. That's probably the middle ground for the lower income people. So that's $2,400 a year for insurance that you're probably not going to use unless there's something catastrophic for you.
And what with Vermont Health Connect, how do you see that as a solution? Do you see doing away with that and replacing it with something else, or what's your thoughts on that?
My opinion is to have insurance companies set up policies that'll cover to X amount of dollars based on somebody's income. Might be for lowest income people, maybe 5,000, you know, to maybe 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50,000 at the high end for lower income people. And then the policies would be inexpensive because they don't have to worry about the catastrophic payouts. And then let the government take over if there is catastrophic medical bills.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, someone would purchase a policy, and the policy will say, we will cover up to $30,000 in medical expenses a year. Then let's say you're in a horrible car accident and you need 4 surgeries and 3 months in rehab to get moving again. And it goes beyond that 30,000. The government, through Medicaid or Medicare, would then pick up the rest of those costs?
It wouldn't even have to be through a program like that. It could be that the insurance company pays it through a fund that the government has set aside. They could draw from that. They're still going to be the one that's covering the bills, but it won't be from the insurance company itself. So you don't need a government bureaucracy to run it, and the cost of the policies are going to be very low.
What about property taxes? You know, that's a big discussion in Vermont. Do you have any thoughts on reducing those?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'd love to hear them.
I'm going to have somebody from my administration go into the schools and work with them to look at ways they can cut spending. Administration is just too bloated as far as I'm concerned. And we're going to look at not telling them they have to do it, but giving them a guideline. Here, this is where you can save money, this, 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 and this. It's whether the towns decide to adopt those savings or not, because I believe in local control. I oppose Act 46, because from what I'm hearing, other than the fact they're closing schools in communities, I'm hearing that they're not cutting administration, and I've heard stories where kids are on a bus for 2 hours each direction.
One of the other things for education you proposed is doing away with the Agency of Education.
Not really doing away with
Okay.
it. You can't do away with it because it's in the Constitution, I
Okay.
believe. But we can gut it down.
And
Make
how
it-
would that look? What would that look
All
like?
it would do is really be a way to communicate from the federal government to the local communities.
So it would be a go-between between the
Yes.
feds and the local communities.
And I want to do away with the state school board and instead have members of the school boards from each community get together quarterly to discuss ideas, talk about what's working, have questions they want to get answered, and proceed like that. And what I want to do is, within those meetings, invite people from around the country that are running successful programs and invite them to come speak. And I've even stated that I'm committed enough to this program to fund it myself the first round.
And how does Act 60 fit into your plans?
I haven't looked at what you can do about Act 60. It was the wrong thing to do because it took away a lot of the local control of the budgets. So people aren't concerned with the budget quite as much as it would be if this is our budget, we have to deal with it.
Okay. One thing you have talked about is how important Vermont's Constitution is to you.
Right.
And yeah, I guess the thing that could make Act 60 tricky too is in the ruling, the Brigham decision. Partly the court said, Vermont's Constitution says we have to provide, I think it's equal opportunity for all students.
Right.
So that is both an economic decision and also
Yeah, it's got to be looked
societal
at.
one. Yeah.
Figure out what can be done about it.
Now, how are you seeing any of these plans reducing costs for taxpayers? Like,
Well,
is it just smaller administrations, or is it?
It's not that. It's adjusting classroom size
Okay.
too, because how do you put it delicately? Some kids just learn easier without the guidance, so they can have bigger classroom size, where the others do need more attention. So I'm not sure. When I was in school, it was pretty much the classrooms are all the same size, or basically the same size. I don't know if they still do that or not, but if it could be changed to smaller classrooms and larger classrooms depending on needs, that would save quite a bit of money right there. And one of my goals I'm looking to try at least is students that aren't going on to further education, make 11th grade a program where they go out and intern. So when they get out of school, they'll be able to hit the ground running. They'll have some experience and some training.
Kind of like a jobs program?
Yeah, and it'll help businesses too, you know?
And what about one of the things Vermont struggles with, and in my opinion, is our wages tend to be lower than the surrounding areas. Some of the things you've talked about are kind of cutting on the government side. What about the wage side? How do you see mediating that?
If we can create more jobs, better paying jobs, wages will go up on their own. You go up into the Upper Valley, the wages are a lot higher than they are down around Springfield. It just works that way. Chittenden County, the wages are a lot better because the economy's doing really well. So that's the thing, is to boost the economy here. Vermont is not a business-friendly state.
How so?
Act 250, for one thing, it's too restrictive. It's too tough to get the building permits. Just property taxes, just the regulations they have. My granddaughter went through training to be a hairdresser, went through a certified school.
Okay.
And she took a test in New Hampshire because Vermont doesn't have the testing. And she passed that, and she's been waiting to get a license for Vermont, and she's been waiting and waiting, and they haven't given her a license yet. So she was working on her own, doing some hair, make some money, and the state found out about it, and now they're giving her a hard time about it.
Do we know why the license wasn't coming through?
No.
No. That's too bad.
Yeah.
And talk to us a little bit about some of your thoughts on prison reform and on criminal justice reform, I should actually say.
Okay. I don't think we should be imprisoning people for nonviolent crimes. I'd rather see where they do nights, like in a school, in a secured place, and not really secured, but just have somebody there monitoring. And they do nights and weekends. They still go to their jobs, and if they aren't employed, then they do community service through the highway department or something like that. But violent offenders, I think they're covered pretty well, putting in prison. But drug dealers, nonviolent drug dealers, I don't think they're best served going to prison, because I don't think that really does anything to change their direction. I want to see Windsor County Prison reopen and put them in there and have a work camp type boot camp thing, where they have to work and they learn discipline, responsibility, that kind of thing. These people, I don't think, have that in their lives.
And one thing that I found interesting in some of your suggestions around criminal justice reform were, once people serve their time, they come out without a record.
Right.
Why do you feel that's important?
Because it just makes it hard for them to get a job. In the case of a friend of mine, a former employee, he was getting treated really poorly by DCF. Anybody call on him, he's got exes. And one of them call and they'd berate all over him because he had a record. And I think that if it's a nonviolent thing, why should they have to carry that with them? They do their time and move on, you know?
What about for someone who maybe they are dealing with an addiction and that addiction led to them to commit a crime?
Well, I would hope we can do better about giving them treatment. And it's got to be not just like a 2-week program or something, because that's shown that it's not effective. It's got to be an extended thing. I'd like to see former addicts being counselors for these people, because they know what's happening with them, you know, and they can really relate to them. Where somebody that's trained in counseling, they understand it, but they really can't relate.
And how do you see yourself, like, what's your approach to accomplishing your goals? You know, how are you going to perform as a leader if you are elected governor?
Well, I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to talk to the people and say, this is the plan, this is what I'm working on, and let them know as I go, where it's not elect me and then leave me alone.
And how about compromise? Because the thing that's interesting about leadership in Vermont is you'd be the top position,
right,
but you'd also be part of a team,
right,
because the Constitution sees the executive and legislative branch as equal.
Well, you have to work together.
And what are some of your approaches to kind of hammering out a compromise?
The approaches, just keeping an open dialogue, really, and listening to both sides. You can't just say, this is my position, and they say, this is my position, and expect it going to work out that way. You know, let's you take my position, I take yours, and we'll just run it through and you know, and kind of role play, and that works for counseling quite a bit.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is very true. And what are some of your deal breakers You're like, I will not bend on.
The constitutions,
Okay.
okay? You can't bend on the constitutions.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's got us to this point.
And you're meaning the state and the
Yes.
the
Yes.
federal. Yep. Any other kind of lines in the sand?
Raising taxes, we don't need to. There's a lot of waste. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
A couple things that very wasteful. Vermont has 66 more state employees making over $90,000 a year than New Hampshire has, even though we have about half the population. What's the necessity for those 66 employees? That's got to be addressed. A retired state employee came up to me and was telling me, he said, you know, there's some offices, there's more administration than there is actual workers. He said, you go into some of the offices, the phone rings, it just rings and rings and rings because none of the management will answer it and there's no worker there to answer it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So that's where you feel a lot of the kind of bloat is in government.
I also believe the cost of employee insurance, health insurance is really high. And health insurance overall is very high. On my website, I talk about how we could reduce the cost of health insurance. But what I'm looking to do is bring in a faith-based health share program. You don't have to be any particular faith. It was just started as a, you know, by one religion, but it's not mandatory.
Okay.
But we could pay 100% of the coverage, and we'd still save the taxpayers tens of millions of dollars by going with the system. Because where the health insurance companies don't really fight to reduce the cost,
Okay.
they do. They really negotiate. And another thing I want to see is, I call it truth in billing law for healthcare.
Okay.
You ever get a bill from a hospital and see how, well, my wife had it. She had to go up there and in the emergency room. She got a bill. One of the things was $200 and something for a couple Tylenol. What she did was she took her blood pressure medicine twice by mistake.
Okay.
And why she needed Tylenol for that is beyond me anyways. But you have no basis in reality for the billing. So my idea is this is their cost, and then they put at the bottom markup percentage or straight dollar wise or something, so you can see what it is. And at least if you don't have insurance or the insurance doesn't cover it all, you go in there and you can negotiate.
Right.
But right now you look at the bill, it's like $20,000 for a bill. How do you negotiate it because you don't know what their actual cost is? This way you'll know.
We are almost out of time. Was there anything you wanted to add or wish I had asked?
There was something about healthcare that popped into my mind, and probably now I'll not be able to think of it until the camera's off.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of your website. You mentioned something about the mandatory AC.
Oh, that's it. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Yes, the governor told the legislature, put an individual mandate bill for healthcare on my desk and I'll sign it. As far as I know, that wasn't even an issue. So now people that can't afford healthcare insurance are going to get penalized for not being able to afford it. And that's wrong. The federal government did away with it because it was wrong. So our governor decided, no, that's a good thing to have. And what we got to do is make it so people can afford health insurance. And force them to buy it is not going to make it more affordable. We know that.
And if people want to find out more about some of your thoughts and campaign, where can they find information?
Vermont Gets keithstern.org. And my Facebook page is Keith Stern for Vermont Governor.
Any upcoming events in the area?
Yes, I have an interview on VPR. It will be Thursday at noon. It'll be rebroadcast at 7 o'clock, if people can't catch it then. And I'm going to be on WKVT Thursday morning at 8:30.
Yes, you will. Yes, we'll have another conversation.
And I've got WCAX. They're doing a profile on the candidates. I think it's coming out on the 28th. And then there will be a debate between the governor and myself on the 31st.
Good luck.
Well, thank you very
with
much.
all those events, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time.